I'm Chase, and Marvel's Black Panther is a big freaking deal. Not everyone understands why or even agrees that this is the case, so let's do a deep dive into the history of how black people have been represented and acknowledged in the film industry in order to figure out why this film is so important. In the early 20th century, motion pictures were rapidly gaining popularity and beginning to take the place of minstrel shows in the entertainment world. Though the medium may have changed, the acts themselves largely remained the same. Black characters were still often portrayed by white actors dressed in blackface, and these characters usually promoted racial stereotypes that are still prevalent today. Even when black actors were hired, the roles they played were anything but flattering. Perhaps the most notable example of this is Lincoln Perry, America's first black movie star. Now, Perry was better known by the name of the character he played, Stepin Fetchit. The character was known for his slow speech, laziness, and overall lack of sense.
Stop this fooling.
I ain't fooling, mister, because I have to have a fork for everything I eat, because if I can't fork it, I can just don't bother with it myself.
What kind of work do you do in the candy kitchen?
I do feet work. I use my feet, yes.
Use your head and answer me sensibly.
Yeah.
Let's be clear. Fetchit was nothing more than a source of comedic relief, which was a common role of black characters at the time. In the post-Civil War era, white Americans were incredibly uncomfortable and even fearful at the idea of powerful black Americans. To alleviate these fears, black characters were usually boxed into one of very few archetypes. The most popular of these were the dunce and the mammy. Black actors knew these roles were disrespectful to black people, but they took the roles because they thought doing so would pave the way for people of color to find careers and respect on the big screen. And in some ways, they were right. In fact, Hattie McDaniel was the first black person to receive an Academy Award for her performance as the Mammy in Gone with the Wind.
I sincerely hope I shall always be a credit to my race and to the motion picture industry. My heart is too full to tell you just how I feel. And may I say thank you, and God bless you.
If we're going to discuss how black people have been represented on film, one movie in particular stands out above the rest for its blatant racism and fear-mongering. D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation is widely regarded as one of the most significant films in history. It's also one of the most racist films ever made, but when the inspiration for a movie is a book called The Klansman, that really shouldn't come as a surprise. The movie takes place in South Carolina after the Civil War and tells a story of white citizens being oppressed and assaulted by black citizens and politicians. The film played on several racist stereotypes. Black folks' insatiable love for chicken? Check. Showing black people as lazy? Check. Uncivilized and aggressive? Check. And the list goes on. I mean, the film climaxes with a massive fight between blacks and whites, wherein the white rebels are saved by the Ku Klux Klan. This played on the worst fears of white Southerners and even led to a massive wave of racist propaganda and even recruitment into the KKK. During this time, there was also a wave of so-called race films, which featured black actors, were made for black audiences, and did show black characters in a more positive light. Now, race films obviously were not widely popular with white audiences, and were largely overshadowed by the mainstream films coming out of a small but growing town that you've probably heard of. By the early 1950s, race films started to fall off entirely as Hollywood began to produce more diverse films after activist groups like the NAACP spoke out against the racism common in mainstream films, and as society became more racially progressive in the wake of World War II.
You know, I've been looking up the records, and you're a natural-born leader.
Fast forward to 1963, Sidney Poitier becomes the first black man to win an Oscar for Best Actor. Denzel Washington spoke to the monumental event when he presented Poitier with a second honorary Oscar 38 years later.
Before Sidney, African-American actors had to take supporting roles in major studio films that were easy to cut out in certain parts of the country. But you couldn't cut Sidney Poitier out of a Sidney Poitier picture. He was the reason a movie got made, the first solo, above-the-title, African-American movie star.
In his acceptance speech, Poitier acknowledged those who came before him and took those disrespectful roles in order to break down walls for black actors.
I accept this award in memory of all the African-American actors and actresses who went before me in the difficult years, on whose shoulders I was privileged to stand to see where I might go.
If you get the time, I really recommend checking out the entire speech. It's incredibly moving, and there's a link in the description below. Today, things are obviously much better than they were decades ago, but they're far from perfect. There are several predominantly black casts made by black creators, but in many ways, these films are eerily similar to the minstrel shows and racist films of the early 20th century. Take Tyler Perry's Medea series, for example. The films and plays are widely popular, but they've been criticized for their continued use of black stereotypes and caricatures in their characters. This step in fetchedism has no real benefit today. It isn't breaking down barriers in an industry. If anything, it's just keeping old wounds open. And look, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with parody or comedic relief, but when there are over 20 films and plays all based on this self-inflicted minstrelsism, we have to start questioning where parody ends and racism begins. And of course, not all predominantly black films are like this, but the fact remains that even films with powerful stories, rich character development, and important messages tend to fall into a very small set of categories. There are films about life in the streets, rags to riches stories, sports, and slavery. And for the record, these films are important and their stories do deserve to be told. The problem is that by and large, they are the overwhelmingly most popular stories being told from the perspective of black people. This is where Black Panther comes in. Here we have a movie that completely disregards Hollywood norms and puts black people and Pan-Africanism front and center. Now, there are some who say this isn't a new thing, including Ben Shapiro.
Hey, people last week were saying I was very upset that there was this movie being made. No, I'm not. I don't care whether the movie is made. It was a good movie. I enjoyed it. What I care about is that the media are treating this as some sort of glorious moment. Like, this is a very, very important cultural moment. It's not a very important cultural moment. I'm sorry, it isn't. There have been blockbusters with black leads, black comic book characters in films, including Nick Fury, hit movies primarily about black people for years, critically acclaimed movies about black people for years. In the last 5 years, I think, 12 Years a Slave and Moonlight both won, both about black people. So the idea that Americans are not willing to go see a movie with primarily black people, like, what are you talking about? I just don't see the evidence for any of that.
And sure, if we reduce the discussion to films made about black people, then Black Panther really doesn't stand out much at all. But the real discussion goes much deeper than that. How are the black people being represented in the films? Let's look at the examples Shapiro gave. Nick Fury. He's a side character. He's a total badass, but he's a side character. Moonlight. The main character struggles with his sexuality, is from a drug-ridden community, and is physically abused and bullied. 12 Years a Slave is literally about slavery. It's in the title. Now, let's rephrase Shapiro's criticism with the added context. Man, I really don't understand the hype surrounding this empowering superhero movie. I mean, we have all these films about slavery. Yeah, that doesn't really work so well, does it? Then we have the people who feel the need to remind us that we already have films about black superheroes, namely Blade and Spawn. But those films are like 20 years old, and it shows. Also, Blade and Spawn are actually anti-heroes, so... Oh, and why doesn't anyone ever mention one of the greatest black superheroes of all time? Frozone from The Incredibles? Come on, guys.
Where is my
recognition?
And while Black Panther is a black superhero movie, we really shouldn't focus solely on that, because doing so ignores what is arguably the most important aspect of the film.
Yeah, it's not a narrative that's wrapped in, like... It's not driven by black pain.
No.
The black people in the film are the creators. They're the inventors. They're running the country. You know what I mean? They have a lot of agency. They have a lot of power in their lives, and that's actually pretty incredible and beautiful to see.
That's Winston Duke, the actor who plays M'Baku in the film, and his explanation hits the nail on the head. Black Panther stands out because it tells a black-centric story without constantly reminding the audience of slavery, disenfranchisement, or any other form of what Duke refers to as black pain. Instead of showing broken characters who must overcome societal challenges in order to save themselves, Black Panther shows characters who are technological geniuses, incredibly wealthy, and incredibly powerful, and who use these things to save the world. In a way, this film is the antithesis of D.W. Griffith's racist masterpiece. Birth of a Nation painted a dystopian aftermath of black leadership, while Black Panther imagines a world where black leadership and African independence led to the most advanced nation on the planet. This idea of celebrating Pan-Africanism was central to the film's design, as director Ryan Coogler shows when breaking down a scene from the film.
Nobody else in this sequence is wearing the color red. Nobody else in the sequence is wearing the color green. Folks who are familiar with the concept of Pan-Africanism, the Pan-African flag is red, black, and green. So when you see T'Challa, Nakia, and Okoye in their covert looks, you know, you see the colors of the Pan-African flag.
You see, Black Panther celebrates blackness and Africanness. It tells black audiences that they are more than the pains they've endured and continue to endure. It gives black children an entire cast of role models to look up to. It empowers women and tears down ideas of femininity. It takes black stereotypes and shreds them to pieces. It sends a message to industry and audience alike that black stories can be more than sports, streets, struggle, and slavery, that these people and cultures are beautiful and powerful and worthy of recognition, and it does so without restraint. And that is why Black Panther is a big deal. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
I am the king, I am the chief, I am the leader that's fighting for peace. You see the squad, I got the keys. There is no surrender, we will not leave. So when I'm calling, they rally the troops. We have defeated some valiant recruits. You got a problem.